Our fifth presenter is Rose Byler, and her speech is entitled Living into the Tension, Social Services and Systemic Change.
You are profiting off of poverty. Coming from African American community organizers who had spent their lives fighting for justice and systemic change, this was hard to hear. My classmates and I had just heard these men present on their organization and were going around with our names and majors when they found out that 3 of us were social work majors, and they really got interested. They asked us to define social work and explain to them what social workers do. We whipped out our professional jargon, rattling off something about empowerment, service, dignity and worth of the person, strength-based perspective, and probably some other things. I thought we would have made our professors proud, but they didn't seem to agree. They believed that social work as a profession creates dependencies and enforces the inequalities in our social structure. We argued back and forth about the strengths and weaknesses of the profession of social work, and then they got down to the base of the issue. You're profiting off of poverty. They believed that the social work profession couldn't really be interested in social change because it's in our best interest financially and in terms of job security to continue the cycle of poverty. Our brief but passionate disagreement exposed underlying differences in our approaches to social change. The community organizers were focusing on long-term structural change through capacity building, while still trying to address individuals' needs. They saw social work as too often improving the lives of individuals while ignoring structural injustice, rendering the individual work futile. The other social work majors and I recognized this tension, but hoped, and still hope, that social work has the potential to work in the lives of individuals while keeping the bigger picture in mind, working as allies with communities and individuals to bring equal access and say in institutions they're part of, even while helping them meet their immediate needs. Everyone there agreed that systems are broken, and that individuals sometimes need help and support while the injustices of the system are being addressed. The question is how we do all that. In this speech, I'll share with you one way that I've seen social services detracting from social change, much in the way these community organizers would have expected, and one way that I've seen social services working with individuals and communities, emphasizing community strengths to create social change. I'll touch on broader policy-level issues and also examine how Christianity can be an impetus for social service work focused on social change. In order to do all these things, I'll need to simplify matters, but I'll try and not simplify away the important parts. First, social workers do get bogged down running the system and forget that we're actually supposed to be critiquing it too. One example comes from my experiences last semester as a medical case management intern working with HIV-positive women at the Women's Collective in DC. At the Women's Collective, we used an educational program called Willow, put out by the CDC, Center for Disease Control. The program's aim is to decrease HIV transmission by empowering HIV-positive women. The program educates about HIV, safer sex, gender pride, support networks, and lots of other things. However, this program, designed to create long-lasting change through empowering women, can have some degrading aspects. Willow had standardized intake forms, pre-tests, post-tests, and session evaluations for the 4 sessions provided by the CDC. I'd start out by asking a client if she'd like to do the intake forms herself or together. Deborah said, "Well, I can't write very well, so it's best if you just ask me the questions." The very first question, then, was age, which got some women defensive right from the start. "Well, I don't like to talk about it, but I'm already 62. Then we asked about employment status. "No, I'm not working right now." "Monthly income?" "Well, there's the $664 from Social Security, and then I also get $16 a month for food stamps." "Level of education completed?" "Only the 10th grade. And it just kept going. Then we continued on with the pretest, which asked questions like, "How many times in the past year have you exchanged sex for drugs and/or money?" Although there were times when Deborah laughed and blushed at the detail of the questions, her body became more slouched and she became more dejected as the interview went on. The program, though, absolutely ignored this dehumanizing effect. It's a program designed to empower women, but it starts by lining up all of the ways that society has labeled them failures. With the Willow program, did we build community, or did we point out a deficiency and provide our own cookie-cutter fix? The program did educate and probably had an overall positive effect, but at what cost? Well, this is an example of how social services can lose sight of the big picture of social change. Let me share an example of a program that I think really did help empower women for lasting change by beginning with their strengths. When I think about the strength perspective in the Women's Collective, I immediately think of the community health workers. These are women who began as clients at the Women's Collective and with some training have stayed on with the organization to work as peers even after they no longer need case management services. They provide intensive attention to women who are out of care or at high risk for one reason or another, including recently diagnosed women. They accompany women to appointments, call them with medication reminders, walk them through prescription pickup, and lots of other things. Through this intensive work, they support the women to the point where the women are more comfortable doing these things on their own and begin to see their own capabilities more clearly. The community health workers generally started out in a pretty rough place. Sabrina was hospitalized and very ill while dealing with her recent diagnosis and caring for her 3 children. But these women were able to build on their own strengths to the point where they're now working with the Women's Collective in a paid position with input into their colleagues' work. These women challenge the injustices in society not through policy-level changes, but through empowering others and building on the strengths that already exist within the community, while also helping provide needed services to individuals. This is real change. The same question of services versus systemic change applies on a broader policy level, too. I'm focusing more on individual level work because that's my experience. But the broader level is just as important. In many ways, social programs and policies do perpetuate oppression and need. They highlight people's needs, thereby bringing on dependency and victimization. So how do we do public policy in a way that encourages social change? Well, that's the topic of another speech, and I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on the topic. One thing I would suggest is the importance of including in the formation of policy the people who it will directly affect. This is important from free and reduced lunches in Harrisonburg all the way to water purification in Zambia. This type of communication is often assumed in the US and on a broader scale, but is also surprisingly lacking in many situations. While many wonderful people do good work in social service areas without a faith background, I believe that adding faith to the mix takes these questions to a whole new level. After all, we're commanded repeatedly in the Bible to do things like do justice, love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. And the narrative I read in the Bible shows a Jesus who confronts oppression and often upsets the social and religious status quo. Now, I know that not everyone reads their Bible that way, but I can't really address that right now, so we'll just pretend like everybody thinks the way I do. This call to action that I read in the Bible can be a great motivator for our churches to do all sorts of good work. But our churches are often guilty of the same shortcomings of secular organizations when it comes to social services and social change. In his article, Why Servanthood is Bad, John McKnight forms this into a question addressing church service organizations. He asks, quote, have they substituted the vision of service for the only thing that will make people whole, community? Are they service peddlers or community builders? He goes on to make the same charges as the community organizers I first mentioned, critiquing the ways funding relegated to those in poverty is spent. Service peddlers soak up money into their services, paying for social workers like me. So the question remains, in both Christian and secular organizations, how do we do service in a way that doesn't preclude community, but instead builds communities to take on oppressive power structures? Our Christianity provides us with a strong rootedness in our social change efforts, so we have to keep facing the questions and tensions involved. This puzzle of how to fit a broader and long-term vision of social change into our day-to-day activities is not limited to a single issue like AIDS in DC or water purification in Zambia. As such, there's no blanket call to action, but the call to live in the tension of opposing right answers, providing for immediate needs and working for broader social justice. We all want world peace and we all want to make the world a better place, but different people do this in different ways. I challenge us to use our gifts to empower individuals, communities, and policy-making bodies in ways that confront systemic injustice and shift toward sustainable change. We must not forget the end goal. In working with individuals, always keep one eye on the bigger picture and work toward policy change or empowering individuals while you work to provide needed services, even if this is just congratulating a woman on her 62 years when she's feeling ashamed of her age. In policy work, our task is the opposite, to always keep one eye on the people, one foot on the ground. Living in this tension isn't a comfortable place to live. It means constant questioning and second guessing. But living in this tension is exactly what we're called to do as Christians and peace builders charged with birthing new systems and lighting new lights, as Shirley Irena Murray wrote in her lyrics. In whatever work we do, our challenge is to examine what service means and if it is sustainable. We must ask ourselves, do our larger scale social change efforts reflect the individual needs of the people, and do our service to individuals strengthen and empower them to claim a place in society for themselves? Thank you.